Hello, all. Good afternoon, and welcome to this session of Rejuvi 45. And I have a guest here with me today. Hey, Scott.
How are you, Vid? Good
I
to
am
see you.
I am doing good. Same here, and hope all's well at your end.
Yeah, all good.
All right. Well, it's getting kind of nippy here in Minneapolis. How's the weather in Chicago?
Starting to get chilly. The fall has definitely settled in this last week.
Yeah, it kind of came in quick too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So welcome, Scott. So for those who are joining us, Scott is a principal at the Rejuvi Venture. Scott actually heads up our sales unit, and Scott has about 20 plus years in sales and enterprise sales expertise. So welcome, Scott. It's great to be in conversation. And on that topic, the conversation today is about the connection. And so the way that we think about this is what we're going to do over the next 40 plus minutes is talk a little bit about the connection between leader growth and business growth. And what we'll discuss is how oftentimes that connection is not served jointly. It's served separately, and then we'll just have a little bit of a discussion around why that is, why it tends to be that way, what some challenges are, but more importantly, how can we connect the two, and why should we be connecting the two? So you ready to kind of jump in, Scott?
Yeah, for sure. Happy to roll with you, Vid.
Excellent, wonderful. So, Scott, I already kind of set us up here in terms of the notion of what the connection means to us here at the Rejuvi venture, right?
Mhm.
So we're all about disrupting leadership development, bringing new thinking, expanding the horizon in terms of how leaders are developed inside organizations. And through your leader journey, I'm sure you've experienced this. I've definitely experienced it at
Yeah.
my leader journey. That as I've thought about me being a leader, and as I've grown in that role in my career, I've gotten the opportunity to be developed, right, and receive some development in that space. And what I've noticed in my case is that every time I've gone and had that that kind of development, it's been always about me, right? In that
Mhm.
conversation, it's about how I improve myself, what opportunities do I have, what are my strengths, how do I leverage them. But there was never, ever, ever a connection to what does that mean for driving my business? At least not explicitly. Implicitly, yes, that's the reason why we're giving development, we're brought in, but there was never an explicit conversation about connecting those dots. So I just wanted to, kind of put that out there and hear a little bit from you in terms of what your experience. So before we go there, there's a couple of things that I thought would be super interesting to reiterate. Now, these are facts we know. So, for example, with all the leader development work that's happening, billions and billions of dollars being spent on it, when we actually ask leaders inside organizations as to how happy they are with current levels of leadership, 90% of them say that they don't have a leadership bench that is developed in the way to drive strategy and business. Number one. Number two, only 25%, so which is 1 in 4 of our leaders who receive leadership development actually rate that they were satisfied with the outcomes of that leadership development. So, given these statistics and the investments being made, and just the context I laid in my personal experience, first question to you is: have you experienced leadership development the same way I have? And if so, can you just provide your thoughts on that?
Certainly. Yes, definitely have, I'd say probably similar experience. Most of my career has been either has been in the sales organization in the sales world within the companies I've worked for. So it's either been as an individual contributor or as a first or second tier sales leader. And so it's sales development programs, sales leadership programs are constant. And I think I might have even shared this in a prior episode as well. Um, they tend to change in the sales organizations as top level sales leadership changes. So whether that's the, chief sales officer, chief revenue officer, chief COO, whomever is ultimately responsible, or that top sales executive who's responsible for the organization's sales teams, will typically have their own methodology, their own approach, and training and development will change with that. In the sales world, because sales is so measured by outcomes, right?
Right.
By revenue, by growth, by licensing, whatever the product and or the metrics might be for the organization. Um, there is a there is always a implied, to reuse that terminology, there's always an implied connection to sales effectivity, sales growth, etc. But is it really measured and tracked? Is it really, truly connected back to the individual outcomes and or the team and or the organizational outcomes? Still, I would say no. My experience has been that it's really not as explicitly connected either.
Interesting. I thought if anybody inside the organization was tied to business results, it would be sales, right? So that was, it was
And
exciting to have you
yeah,
on
and
this
they
conversation.
are,
Yeah.
but I just don't think, not in the way that we think about, not in the way
Mm,
that we think about the connectedness and the quite honestly the logical connectedness that there should be.
interesting. So what do you think though, from your perspective, right? If I had to ask you, what do you think are the biggest obstacles preventing organizations from seeing that link, or at least seeing it, and then of course, more importantly, connecting the dots? Like what do you feel are the obstacles?
Personally, I think there is a when you look at where development, leadership development, organizational development responsibilities lie. Many times they are kind of held in a in a bit of a vacuum, in the development, in the HR world. Now, I'm not trying to blame
Right.
any of the entities or the organizations within a company, but I think sometimes that is the primary obstacle, is because it's viewed as a freestanding program, right?
Hmm.
That's, I think, probably the most chief obstacle or concern that I've seen or experienced.
That's a good perspective, actually. I think this notion around organizational structures perpetuating the division of those two connects, if you may, between leader development and business growth, and then how one pushes in the other, right? The thing is that in my belief system, um, I feel that there's that. I think you're right. It's about the organizations and how it's structured and etc. But I also think that it's a belief system too. Like when I've kind of, thought about this in my own career, and I've kind of, thought about it even in association with Rejuvi, the belief system of whether you can actually measure leader development and business growth in the same, in the same kind of, the same vein. The notion that somehow leader development is either too far removed from the signal of performance, business performance, right? And can you credibly tie those two things? Like one is pushing on the other. Okay, great. Can you establish that quantitatively? And then can you actually do something from the information you get from it? So that's been a big barrier, I think, in terms of the. But do you have like an example, Scott, that you could share where, in your opinion, if there was that connect, how could it have played out favorably or differentially? And just curious because you're in sales, you've received development as a sales leader. I'm just curious to see if you have an example top of mind.
Well, certainly, and I guess you could take this kind of a couple of different directions. But given kind of the accurate assumptions, I think you make in regards to a sales organization being heavily metriced, right? And not my words, not yours, but that that's an organization that is definitely understanding of, measurement and cause and effect type realities
Mhm.
of um, activity of development on the net outcomes, the net revenue of the organization through the sales activity. There are so there are very logical connections that can be made, and you do see them sometimes made where, all right, so we've gone through this development, and now you're understanding, the benefits of spending more time on accurately defining the problems or the target audience that we should be pursuing, as prospects and ultimately as clients, and then thus being able to measure the results of this development to properly focus activity and thus improve productivity. Is you see that you see it at start with the programs, but you don't necessarily see it, or I have not historically seen it then measured continually all the way to outcomes and really, organizational outcomes on an annual basis. And how is it affecting things like um, our market share, right? Or our, earnings growth, right? Our profit margins, those types of things. And I think that's really what is different about how we believe modern leadership needs to be developed.
Yeah.
So you see it start, but you don't necessarily see it executed all the way through and to the
Yep.
degree that it should be. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. I think it does in the sense that the question was like, are there any examples you can think of? So it's self-evident that there are none. And the best example, if there was one, it was partial. Like, so the notion of saying there's really no, in your experience, because I would have had a very similar response to that question myself,
Mhm.
that I don't have a single example that I could share in my development, journey where I actually received my growth and then was able to tie that to my unit's growth or my business's growth in explicit ways. So I was just curious if you had a different experience. So interesting. One of the things, if think about, the consequences of that, right? Like, so, we talked about the fact that it doesn't happen. We talked a little bit about, well, why do we think that's the case, right? And we talked about organizational separation could be one. I said belief systems in terms of whether you can actually make the connection or not. But the piece that I wanted to get into a little bit is what are the consequences of not doing it? So if you think of an operating unit, like you think of a business, right? A business is like an organism. And the organism, in my opinion, really has three big parts to it, right? It's the financial piece, it's the operational piece, and then it's the cultural piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
In your opinion, right, as you sit and kind of reflect upon the lack of this connection between leader development and business growth and why that happens, where do you think the biggest consequences of not making that connection? Do you feel it's any one of those three, or do you feel strongly that it's across all of them? So just wanted to kind of get your sense on it.
Yeah, at first blush, I think you want to try to find um, which one is impacted more. But I think um, the reality is that you want and need to see the change across
Right.
all three mechanisms within the organization, or all three components of that organism. Um, it needs to be a butterfly effect,
Mhm.
right? If we tweak and change one of those aspects, cultural, what have you, it will have an effect on operations and on finance. And that connection needs to be thought about, right? So I think that really is is the answer,
Yeah.
is that it will have an impact
Yeah.
across
Across.
the
Yeah.
entirety of the organization.
Yeah. Makes sense. I think that, the notion that better leaders. This is why I just, right at the beginning, I coded that we're spending tens of billions of dollars on developing leaders inside organizations. It's not for lack of attention. It's not lack for spending. Um, but the notion that, that we do that because we know better leaders makes for better employee engagement, right?
Hmm.
And better employee engagement makes for better customer or consumer service, and better consumer and customer service makes for better loyalty, which means that, you know, better financial results. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So the cultural, operational, financial, if you may, link is there. It's clear that it's qualitatively and instinctively there. That's why we're spending all the resources we are. Um, but the not connecting the entire cycle the way that I just laid it out, right? Leaders to teams to to service to loyalty.
Hmm.
It's almost in some ways it's shocking, isn't it, to not be able to kind of connect that and and kind of see that all the way through. What do you think? What do you think? Um, you know, uh, we talked about organizations and belief systems kind of being probably some of the reasons, but what do you think is the reason why we just simply are not connecting that thread?
Well, um, legacy is always, part of the problem, part of the challenge. It's not how things are done, not how we do things here. Is part, of the reality, I would believe.
Mm,
Um, and so if you look at, I've had the benefit of being a part of, both, and in both individual contributor and leadership role or responsibility, a part of both large global organizations, or a sub entity within a large global organization, as well as, small startup organizations, such as ours, right?
mm,
And one of the beauties of the opportunity of being a part of smaller organization is this requirement and responsibility to be a virtualist. You are a versatilist, rather. I'm sorry.
yeah.
Um, and that you will be responsible for wearing multiple hats on any given day, and those hats may change. And so you have to understand,
Mm,
the responsibilities and the requirements, that come with that hat, the impact that they have on the immediate responsibilities, that hat carries with it, but also the impact that they have on the organization as a whole.
mm,
And so, you know, I think it comes, for me, many times it kind of comes back to that, keep it simple type mentality, right? Keep it focused on the key factors. As organizations grow, sometimes that, the by design, some fractures are entered into that, holistic, mentality of the organization. And we're focused on, we've got objectives within our organization. And that, yes, they serve the greater good, they serve the greater whole, but they're not as necessarily connected to the big picture, objectives, on a daily basis, right? So you kind of get into your lane and you focus on your lane, and
yeah.
thus a little bit of disconnectedness comes. Um,
Yeah.
and the best large organizations do, make a very exerted effort to, keep those walls from being built and those barriers from being created. But it's, that too is a challenge, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I love what you said, the notion around the notion around the silos and how accountabilities are built and accountabilities are, are kind of, enforced, if you may, within organizations. And I loved how you connected the big organization conundrum to the small organization, strength and opportunity is like, the versatilist, I think you said, you need to be wearing multiple hats. You're accountable for multiple outcomes. And the notion of that means that you have line of sight to all the things that are either connected, or even the ones that are not connected, and then kind of, self-learning from that loop. One has to think, and would love to hear your thoughts. I have a strong perspective on this. One has to think that this disconnectedness, right? The not connecting leader development to business growth and not talking about it, not reinforcing it in explicit ways, does have an impact on morale, innovation, and just overall performance, right? I would suspect that it would.
Mhm.
Because in my opinion, when I've been inside organizations where even, implicitly, right, like in a very soft way, there were the conversations about connecting that leader to team, to service, to loyalty. The level of, I think, engagement from the teams and the broader, units was just much higher. And again, qualitatively, never quantitatively, just qualitatively seemed to be so much better that it would drive to people feeling like they are welcome, they belong, they want to come in, they want to do things differentially. And of course, then that somewhere was driving overall performance. But the one thing that I've observed, which is super interesting, would love to hear your thinking as well on this, is that as we think of that, in innovation, morale, just overall performance, the one thing where I saw a huge difference, and this is where I aspired to think that if we actually had a system that could connect the dots, I think it would be so cool, was this notion about new business models, right? Self-disrupting, coming up with the next level innovation, no matter which industry you're in, no matter which product you're making, no matter which service you're in, just kind of stepping up to the next level. If you, that's what I kind of think of as innovation. Do you have like, would that be something? What's your perspective, like in terms of like connecting the dots? Do you feel that innovation is a real benefit from connecting the dots, or is it more morale and performance?
Well, I think innovation and kind of I mean the innovator die type theme or reality that some organizations believe to be core to their is not a bad thing by any means. And so sponsoring and promoting that the innovation effort is something that each and every employee within organization is a part of
Mm,
is very healthy.
mm,
And it does, you can think of the, movie that came out, I think it came out this summer or sometime within the last year, about Flamin' Hot Cheetos. And
mm.
if you
Yep,
remember the story, or if you know
yep,
the story, right, that I believe the gentleman was a janitor,
right.
um, who, came up with the idea, right? And so I haven't seen the movie. I know the premise, but that's it.
Oh, it's a
So I'm not going
fantastic
to
movie. Yeah, I've seen it. It's fantastic. Yep, yep.
and there are a lot of examples like that. But I can also think of an example in the corporate world. And interestingly enough, it is a storied global organization headquartered as well in Minneapolis, in 3M. They have a mandatory requirement that you spend time in the labs or in the workshops across the entirety of I mean, I want to say it's like 20%
Mm,
of the work week is allowed to be
mm,
you're allowed to be in the labs or in workshops at 3M,
mm.
no matter what your job, your responsibility, or your role is, right?
That's
So thinking about constant innovation, and what is that next best thing. So it's not that is definitely something that can be promoted, sponsored at the Fortune 50, global Fortune 50 organizations as well, and there are certainly examples of organizations that do it.
yeah.
And so, yeah, I think there's no question that there's a benefit and thus a connectedness. And that's an organization too that has a storied history of, multi-generational
Mm.
families of employees. Now they're obviously very sizable in the Twin Cities, so there's a lot of employees, there, but it's not uncommon to speak to someone who was a third generation
Oh yeah.
3M employee,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Very true. Going back to that flaming hot, Cheetos example, what was fascinating in that story which I think now that you're putting it in the context of this discussion, which I never ever made made that connection till like literally 5 minutes ago when you said it, was that what a lost opportunity that they never connected the dots between giving this gentleman the support and the development he needed to become their innovator in chief. Do you know what I mean? He
Yeah.
didn't become the innovator in chief, but he had a pretty significant growth and a pretty significant career, and still is, I believe, at Pepsi and Frito,
Hmm.
basically driving thinking and innovation. But what a lost opportunity to not have followed, even if that example of one, to say, hey, we brought this person in, we gave this person the kind of the level of support and development, and we'd like to see how that has, in explicit terms, driven what portion of the bottom line, top line growth for the company. Don't you think? Like,
Yeah.
what an amazing opportunity you have here to say, all right, we can actually see the business, the differential business result. And even there, I would doubt if they actually explicitly connected the dots. So
Yeah.
it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I'm
Fascinating.
sure I'm sure somewhere, whether it's in that story, in the movie or, maybe in the broader context of the story, there's probably some type of measurement as to, the potential opportunity loss that they had by not recognizing that
Uh-huh.
resource for innovation
Yeah.
earlier, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Totally. And that's an easy thing to plug, I think, right? Because then you can say this idea came up 10 years ago and nothing was done about it. Well, how many cases did you not sell over the past 10 years? Do you know what I mean? Like
Hmm. Oh
it's a
yeah.
very depressing number, I'm sure, but I'm sure you could do the math on that one. And anyways, I think that that's the math probably that motivated them to elevate this gentleman to probably the highest levels of innovation. He still is at Pepsi, by the way. He still has a
Yeah.
pretty clear and it's kind of incredible story. So yeah, so for folks who've not seen that, I highly recommend it. It's actually a pretty interesting movie. Thanks for bringing that up. Hey, we've talked a lot about the connectedness. We talked about why it doesn't happen, but I would love to pivot now to really kind of talking about, all right, what are some integration strategies? Like, okay, we're hopefully establishing that it's important to connect those two, leader growth to business results. So wanted to get your thoughts a little bit about what in your mind would be the most effective way to integrate those two? In other words, leadership development directly into both business strategy and business outcomes. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Hmm. Um, well, the thing that keeps ringing in my head, and I'm trying to, the connection will be obvious. I'm just trying to make it uh, play as a good answer to your question. Is our access to data and our access to information today is far more powerful than it ever has been before, and
Yep.
growing at such a at an incredibly profound rate, right? Scary in some instances that if we're not controlling and governing how data is being um, levered, used, made available. There's certainly plenty of risk that can come with it as well, right? Topic for another discussion, topic for another day. But the fact that um, having so much powerful information readily available at our fingertips and the capability now to slice and dice that data in literally probably infinite ways
Right.
if you wanted to is at the core of why and how we should be um,
Mhm.
connecting these dots, so to
Yeah.
speak, or connecting these two value streams for the organization: leadership growth and leadership development, and organizational growth and organizational development, or outcomes and results, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, no, I think that, one explicit way to you know, connect the dots or connect leadership development to business results is I think it starts with intent, is to believe that you can actually do it, number one,
mhm.
and it's important enough to do it. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Notion that, hey, listen, it's an investment, right? Like we invest and we do return on investment calculations on a bunch of things on a corporation's balance sheet, whether it's, bottom line or top line. The notion that we're taking resources, which are typically limited, and we're making strategic choices of divvying those resources up to the right levers that drive growth and performance. And we measure and say, hey, have we done what we wanted to do? Has it returned what we were expecting? And if it did, great, do more of it. If it didn't, then pivot, right? Do something else.
Right.
So this thinking is what I would say is the first thing that needs to change. That one should intend or expect that whatever they're investing in their leader development actually has an outcome in business results, and then predetermine what those results are. Like, what's the desirable outcome? Like, if I'm basically investing in a leader community inside my organization to go get developed, what is the outcome I'm hoping to get from it? I think that's probably the place to start with, to say intend and want to do it. Number one. Number two then is, is this notion about return on investment. Do you have any thoughts there? Like, what would you do you think that, return on investment is something we should aspire all the way to, or is it just enough to intend it and want to do it, and then of course everything else follows, obviously? What's your thinking on the return on investment piece of it?
Oh, well, I mean, if I'm understanding the question properly, I think the answer is unequivocally yes. We should be taking it, all the way through a, measured and qualified return on investment exercise. Because that's what, if we, some of the things you were speaking about earlier, employee satisfaction, right? We certainly live in a time in a, where the world has shrunk, right? We can,
Hmm.
it's as easy for me to work for an organization that is headquartered in Singapore as it is for a company that's headquartered in Chicago, where I am, right? The world has truly shrunk. So the opportunity, the opportunities for me today are bigger than they've ever been before. So if I'm not satisfied here, if I'm not connected to my organization and the outcomes, it's easy for me to change.
Hmm.
So the um, you know we as individual employees want and need that connection. We want and need to see and feel that investment. And yes, if the organization is making an investment of that nature, they should certainly understand what the returns are. And to your point a moment ago, if it is not a fruitful, or it's not a, if it's not a fruitful return on that investment, then why not? Or should we pivot from this? And that's not saying stop investing,
Right.
but it's saying, we've got the data, we've got access to the data. We should certainly be measuring if it's effective or not, why, and what should we be doing, what should we be doing differently, because it will improve the lie of the organization. It will improve the lie of the individual employees, and certainly of, so thus of everybody within the organization. So
Hmm.
wholesalely, I believe that return on investment for anything of this nature should be,
Right.
uh, fully executed. Again,
Right. And
hopefully
it's,
I understood your question properly.
yeah, yeah, no, fair answer. The whole notion that significant amount of resources are being, you know, prioritized inside organizations towards this
Mhm.
effort, the leadership development effort. So the expectation that we measure the return on that investment is pretty clear in my mind, but it's good to hear your thoughts on that too. If you could, because now we're talking about what's the way to connect the dots. If you could, do you have some suggestions about specific action steps that companies could take to connect these two, like leader development to business growth?
Um, well, so there should be no, first of all, any organizational goals and objectives should be should certainly be broken down to actionable items that can be connected to,
Hmm.
ideally to anyone within the organization. And they're going to differ from one organizational unit to another. They're going to differ from one leader to the next, differently for any number of factors. They're going, all the way down to, entry level positions and roles within an organization. There should be a direct connection tied to organizational outcomes and impact so that I personally can, understand, as I'm growing and developing what impact I'm having and potentially have the capacity to see what that impact looks like. And the same with having access and visibility to, okay, how does that look for the organization that I'm a part of, right? How does that look in essence all the way up the line in the ladder? Not necessarily to the individual, right? Not that I could go and see the measured impact that every other employee is having by name, but the organizations that I'm a part of to be able to see and have that measure or have that impact measurement
Hmm.
assessed. So
Yeah, interesting. So it's almost like what you're saying is that break it down, right? Make it into smaller piece parts, more chewable,
yep,
more connected, to use
yep,
that term, no pun intended, so that folks can actually start seeing that when you move one lever, you can credibly see a change in the outcome you're expecting to see. So kind of move
yep,
that signal closer, if you may,
yes,
and then start building that ecosystem. I think that's brilliant. In my mind, I always have this notion, and it was given to me by a mentor I had actually early in my career. And I said, how do I move? How do I get going? And this gentleman said, start by starting. you know so one of the other strategies could simply be to just believe it can be done, expect it can be done, make it into small pieces, and I guess get going. Like pick one small area, pick one small part of the organization where this is super critical, and you believe the signal is strong enough, and then just basically get moving. I think that would be a pretty good way to get going as well. What are some in your opinion, again, can you share some examples of, either in your experience, in even small ways, can you share some examples of when that was, when that connection happens, what magic, comes off it?
sure. Again, I mean, from a sales perspective, again, there's constant measurements, and Vid, you've certainly heard me and some of our internal discussions talk about activity versus productivity, right? And much like start by starting, very simplistic advice, but if you pause and think about it a little bit, being focused on being productive versus active, there are parallels, but there are clearly some distinctions as well between the definition of the two terms. And so, um, you know, sales organizations are definitely simple things that might be measured depending upon the product, the product or the solution that you're responsible for could be measured in unit sales, right? They could be measured in new customer acquisition versus growth of existing clients, right? In many other ways. But what examples that I have, seen and experienced personally certainly are taking the necessary time to understand, your product, your platform, and the value that it provides to clients so that in any and every conversation you can answer a question with a a logical connection back to the value proposition of your product or solution. And
Mm.
so it's that taking the time to really understand your responsibility or your platform, not too much time, because you do have to start by getting started, get started by starting.
Yeah.
But that taking that time to understand the objectives and understand the product or the platform can have tremendous, multifold impacts, multifold impacts on results. So those are some of the best examples that I've seen in sales, in my sales experience is um, productivity versus the activity. Don't
Yeah.
just jump, right? Yes, you do have to get started, but if you start smart and you focus on the things that are critical, to your organization, and more importantly, critical to your customers, be they internal or external,
Yeah.
you're going to see multiple types of results.
Yep. Yep.
Multifold meaning 2x, 3x.
Yep.
If you were just activity focused, if you will.
Yep. Fantastic. Hey, last question for you, Scott. Last question is, think if you may, you're sitting in front of a leader. What what advice would you give this leader who wants to champion the integration of these two pieces within their organization? What's the one thing you would say to them? Top of mind.
Hmm. Um, it's I guess it's going to kind of come down to um, almost parroting the point that one of the last points that you just made, which is it's along the line of just do it, right? It
Yeah.
is you have to um, you have to focus on um, the outcomes that the organization requires, the organization is focused on and expects, and then break it down across your leadership team, right? That is the key. I know it sounds simplistic, but that's really the mandatory component. I don't,
Yeah.
it's not a missing link per se.
Yeah.
But it really has to start, in my mind, with those organizational objectives, and then tying them back to the individual leaders, to their teams, and never removing that connection and that responsibility from the development of the direction of the individual leaders.
Yeah. Yep. Fantastic. Well, thanks for that. Just to summarize, then, there's three things I think I heard in this conversation with you, Scott. One is, you know, believe and expect that you can connect leader development to business growth because it kind of has a ton of benefits from, we talked about organizationally, teams based, etc. So believe and
Mm-hmm.
expect.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is, like, to your point about break it into bite-sized pieces and get the signal closer to the stimulus so that you can start build some credibility and belief in the fact that this actually can be measured. And by the way, it does drive a lot of benefits. And the third one is just get going, just start, right? Just
Yep.
just just get going, and then it becomes a virtuous cycle. So once again, hey, thanks a ton, Scott. It was wonderful chatting with you. It's been a wonderful discussion. I know I'll take some of these thoughts with me as I go through my day, and even over the next next few weeks, months, and also for all those who are listening to this, the strong call to action is that just either go to our website Rejuvi Venture, or to the rejuviventureevents.com to learn more about this and learn more about how we're actually disrupting the leadership development space to do this. So I'd encourage you all to do that. But once again, thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us. And this will be the last session in October. We'll kick up the cycle again for Rejuvi Venture 45, Rejuvi 45 sessions in November, on November 7th. And what we'll be talking about there, Scott, is a little bit of an empathy discussion around what does it mean or how does it feel to be on the receiving end, both for the leader and for the business, when we don't connect these two dots. Like, what is happening out there in the real world? So once again, thank you for joining. It was a pleasure. Thank you all for listening. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Sid. Pleasure was mine.